Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Casey Gay McCalla, and this is reality theory. That's a play off the term conspiracy theory. Now, this term conspiracy theory has been weaponized against critics of real conspiracies. When you think of people who are journalists or historians, they're discredited by the terms conspiracy theorists by the people who are actually conspiring. And we're going to get down to why. So, we're going to start right now with the definition of conspiracy. So, conspiracy, conspiracy, a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. That don't sound too crazy. Sound like that happens a lot. Theory, an idea used to account for a situation or justify a course of action. Those people who study science, there's scientific theory. So basically, when you have a theory, you test the theory, you prove it wrong and prove it right. Now that's the kind of way that law enforcement works. That's the way scientists works. That's the way historians should work. But we'll move on. So that would make a conspiracy theory an idea that a group plans in secret to do harmful or unlawful things. All right, so it seems like a lot of people is planning to do bad things in this world if you open your eyes. Let's look at the difference between a conspiracy theorist and an investigative journalist. Because I think if you replace the term conspiracy theorist with investigative journalist, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Investigative journalism means the unveiling of matters that are concealed either deliberately by someone in a position of power or accidentally behind a chaotic mass of facts and circumstances and the analysis and exposure of all relevant facts to the public. That sounds like a conspiracy theorist to me. I think what they do with the term, if you're an investigative journalist, you try and find out. You test your theories, see if they work, right? And you come to the conclusion that that is a conspiracy going on. You are no longer an investigative journalist. You are dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. So what is a historian? A historian is an expert in or student of history, especially that of a particular period, geographical region, or social phenomenon. So again, if you're a historian and you study a certain era or time and you come to the conclusion that there was a conspiracy, you are no longer a historian, you are dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. So let's look at the American government's definition of conspiracy. A conspiracy involves two or more people deciding to commit a crime or to commit a lawful act by unlawful means. So all it takes is two people for conspiracy. So if you and your homie decide to rob a liquor store, that's a conspiracy. If you and two other people decide to buy drugs off somebody, if weed is illegal in your state, that is a conspiracy. If a gang leader decides to put a bag on someone's head and have them killed, that is a conspiracy. C-O-N-spiracy. So who's getting charged with all these conspiracies? Young Thug, charged with conspiracy, part of the RICO Act, the Racketeering, Influencing, and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is basically meant to stop people from conspiring, people like the mafia, which we'll get into. So Young Thug was charged with conspiracy, Bobby Shmurda was charged with conspiracy, Tekashi 6ix9ine and the Nine Trey Gangsters, they were charged with conspiracy. So a lot of people charged with conspiracy. MS-13 gets charged with conspiracy, racketeering conspiracy, which included narcotics trafficking, extortion, human trafficking, etc. Okay. So again, the RICO Act was made for the mafia, right? So it was made to get these high-level mob figures. John Gotti was hit with the RICO, and part of his RICO was conspiracy to murder. Gotti murdered Paul Castellano. That was a big thing. He actually didn't do it himself, which was why it was a conspiracy. He hired other people to do it. So if you put a bag on someone's head, that's conspiracy. If you're a member of a gang and you tell another member of your gang to kill someone, that's conspiracy to murder, right? So again, if you put a bag on someone's head, that's conspiracy to murder. If you're the head of a mafia organization and you ask someone to be killed, that's conspiracy to murder. So a lot of attention from the government on conspiracy. A lot of people know about the RICO Act, the Racketeering, Influence, Corruption Organizations, right? Which is a lot of time people get charged with conspiracy. That was kind of meant for the mafia. So we know the mafia conspires. And a lot of the reason they conspire is for power. John Gotti murdered Paul Castellano because he wanted to be the boss. So mafia people do conspire, right? Now, oh my God, can you believe it? That not only do gangsters conspire, but American politicians conspire. My boy Kwame Kilpatrick was charged with conspiring. He was supposedly taking bribery. He went to jail for maybe like 10 years or something like that, crazy amount of time, because he was conspiring. He was part of a conspiracy involving his brother and his homie to take bribes and, I guess, defraud the government. Okay. Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick found guilty of corruption, charged for 24 charges, including racketeering conspiracy. So allegedly, well, not allegedly, it was proven in court. He was conspiring with his brother and his father to take bribes, which they would make money off to defraud the government. So I guess, politicians can conspire. It's not a theory. It's been proven in court. Another brother, my brother Rep Fattah, was charged with conspiracy. And again, it was bribery. Now, this is a congressman from Philly charged with conspiracy because he was taking bribes from some rich white guy, I think. And yeah, so I guess African American politicians do conspire. It's not a theory. The government has proven it in court, indubitably. So it's not a theory. Politicians do conspire. So I guess, African American politicians is conspiring according to the government. They're getting charged with it. So we see conspiracy happening at lots of different levels. Now, conspiracies have been going on since the beginning of time. If you look at the Bible, everybody's conspiring. Jews conspiring against Egyptians, Egyptians conspiring against the Jews. Everybody's conspiring in the Bible. All sorts of conspiracies in the First Testament. And when they saw him after, when he came unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. That all of you have conspired against me, and that none of you has showed my son hath made a league of my son Jesse. And Saul said unto him, Why ye have conspired against me? Thou art the son of Jesse, and the Basha, son of Aljah, of the house Issachar, conspired against him. And so there's a lot of conspiring going on in the Bible. All the leaders are conspiring to get more power. That's kind of how it worked. The big conspiracy in the Bible of the Second Testament was Judas and the Romans and the priests conspiring against Jesus. Now, Jesus was a very popular figure. He had a lot of political and religious power that the priests did not like and that the Romans did not like. And Judas was jealous of him and he was greedy. Judas conspired with the local priests in Jerusalem and the Romans to have Jesus killed. Now, this was a conspiracy. The Romans feared Jesus' power in the Bible, if you believe the Bible. Judas was jealous of Jesus, and the priests were jealous of his religious power. So 3 separate groups conspired to take out Jesus. The Romans had a very similar incident when all the senators of Rome conspired to kill Julius Caesar. Once again, we had a very popular leader, and a lot of people were scared of his power, didn't like what he was doing with his power, and wanted his power, so they killed him. They all stabbed him. It was one big conspiracy, men in power conspiring to kill a leader. Abraham Lincoln was killed because of a conspiracy. Let's look what Wikipedia says. Occurring near the end of the American Civil War, Lincoln's assassination was part of a larger conspiracy intended by Booth to revive the Confederate cause by eliminating the 3 most important officials of the United States. So this was not just a conspiracy to kill Lincoln, it was a conspiracy to overthrow the American government. Conspirators Lewis Powell and David Harold were assigned to kill Secretary of State William H. Seward, and George Asderoff was tasked with killing the vice president. So this was a conspiracy. It wasn't just Booth. He had a lot of people with him. They really wanted to take over the American government. So that was part of the plan. So a lot of times when you do see conspiracies, it's a conspiracy about power. People who want power kill people with power so they can have power to themselves. Now, if we go back to 1933, according to BBC Radio 4, a bunch of businessmen planned a right-wing American coup to overthrow President D. Roosevelt. Now, this was to be done with 500,000 war veterans. The plotters were alleged to involve some of the most famous families of America. Owners of Heinz Ketchup, Bird's Eye, not familiar with that, Good Tea, Maxwell HSC, and George Bush's grandfather, Prescott. So George Bush's grandfather, Prescott, tried to overthrow the American government. Why did he do that? Because he believed that their country should adopt the policies of Hitler and Mussolini to beat the Great Depression. So Bush's grandfather wanted to have a Nazi government in America and try to overthrow the government, according to BBC Radio 4. Now let's look at Hitler. So Hitler actually came to power a little before that in 1933, and how he did this allegedly is he burnt down the Reichtag building, which was like their Congress. So now there have been conflicting reports. Originally, Hitler blamed the communists, and he blamed one Dutch communist, and he tried to blame it on conspiracy. Conspiracy didn't work. Now the Communist Party had their own trial, and they claimed it was Hitler who burned it down, to blame it on the communists so we could take power. And most recently, though, historians have debated about it. An ex-Nazi officer has came forth and said that he helped the alleged Reichtag Fire arsonists get to the Reichtag Fire, and it was already burning when they got there, meaning that the fire was already there, it was already burning, and that this Dutch communist was a patsy, a scapegoat. Those of you who are fans of Tom Cruise, you might have seen Operation Valkrie. In this movie, the German generals conspire to kill Hitler because they do not like what he's doing with his power. They might want his power, etc. For those of you who read Shakespeare, it's all conspiracies. In Hamlet, everybody's conspiring to kill Hamlet. In Othello, he's conspiring to kill his wife and other people. In King Lear, his own daughter is conspiring to take his power. In Macbeth, Macbeth is conspiring with the witches to take power. So a lot of people see Shakespeare as great comedies and tragedies, but the biggest element in Shakespeare is conspiracies. For those of you who watch Game of Thrones, lots of conspiracies going on there. Lord Baelish and Lady Tyrell, they conspired to kill Joffrey. All right. They didn't like what he was doing with his power, didn't like him. Maybe they wanted his power. My man Jon Snow got killed by his own homies in the Night Watch. They didn't like what he was doing with his power. He had too much power. They wanted the power. They offed him. This is one of my favorite two movies of all time, Godfather 1, Godfather 2. Michael Corleone is conspiring to kill Hyman Roth. Hyman Roth is conspiring to kill Michael Corleone. In the first movie, we had Sollozzo and Barzini conspiring to kill Vito Corleone. And a lot of times in the conspiracies, as we've seen with Judas and Jesus and Caesar and Brutus, we see you kind of need an inside man for these conspiracies. Like you need the Judas or you need the Brutus to kind of get to the Jesus or the Caesar. Same thing with Vito Corleone. They needed Paulie. And when they tried to kill Michael Corleone, they needed his brother Fredo. So there's an inside man who betrays these powerful people when they get killed in these conspiracies. Another one of my favorite TV shows of all time is The Wire. Stringer Bell is constantly conspiring. He conspires to kill D'Angelo. He conspires to sell drugs with Prop Joe. He conspires to make money with Clay Davis. He conspires to get his own homie Avon Barksdale locked up, while his own homie Avon Barksdale is conspiring with my man Omar and brother Muzone to get Stringer Bell killed. And that's how he got killed, because he conspires too much. And it's not just the criminals conspiring on The Wire, it's the politicians, it's the people in the media, it's the teachers. Everybody conspires. Now, this is one of my favorite shows right here, The Boys. So if you watch The Boys, you see the homie Homelander. Homelander works with Madeline Stillwell, who's the head of the Vought Corporation, and politicians to kill politicians. They cover it up. So if you watch The Boys, it's a lot of conspiring. People are conspiring to take power. Another time they had a big attack on the Senate, which was actually an internal attack from Vought and Victoria Newman, and they blamed it on evil superhumans now. So, okay. So these are conspiracies. Now let's go to my favorite movies. Also, Star Wars. Conspiracies in Star Wars. Senator Palpatine comes to power by starting these kind of false wars, and then he eliminates democracy, and then he becomes Emperor Palpatine. And then the good guys start conspiring. They conspire to blow up the Death Star, and they get Darth Vader, and they get Senator Palpatine. But it's a lot of conspiracies going on in Star Wars, especially from the bad guys, the Sith guys. Watchmen is another one of my favorite comic books, movies, and TV series. So in the original Watchmen comic book, we had the comedian who's kind of meant to represent a government agent or a CIA agent. And here he's talking about killing Woodward and Bernstein. And he's talking about the JFK assassination. If you look at the movie Watchmen, the conspiracy theory behind that is the comedian actually kills JFK in the beginning of the movie. Now, that's not what happens in the comic book, and it's not what happens in the prequel before Watchmen. In the prequel before Watchmen, the comedian does not kill JFK, but he does kill his brother, RFK. So Watchmen, if you watch the new series with Regina King, you'll see they have this big grand conspiracy of the squid attack. Now, Ozymandias, the kind of grand conspirator of Watchmen, manufactured a giant squid attack because he wanted to stop World War. In order to keep up this myth, he has to have constant squid attacks happening so people believe that the original conspiracy of the squid attack is a real thing. So where did the term conspiracy theory come from? Now, it's been around for a long time, but it's really been popularized since the assassination of JFK. Now, the CIA created a document and they sent it out to a whole bunch of editors and all their friends in the media trying to discredit people who were criticizing the Warren Report. Let's read this right now. Chiefs, certain stations and bases countering criticism of the Warren Report. Our concern from the day of President Kennedy's assassination on, there has been speculation about the responsibility of his murder. Although this was stemmed for a time by the Warren Commission report, which appeared at the end of September 1964, various writers have now had time to scan the Commission's published reports and documents for new pretexts and questioning, and there has been a new wave of books and articles criticizing the Commission's findings. In most cases, the critics have speculated as to the existence of some kind of conspiracy, C-O-N-spiracy, and often they have implied that the Commission itself was involved. Presumably, as a result of increasing challenges to the Warren Commission's report, a public opinion poll recently indicated that 46% of the American public did not think that Oswald acted alone, while more than half of those polled throughout the commission had left some questions unresolved. Doubtless polls abroad would show similar or possibly more adverse results. The trend of opinion is a matter of concern to the U.S. government, including our organization, the CIA. The members of the Warren Commission were naturally chosen for their integrity, experience, and prominence. They represented both major parties, and they and their staff were deliberately drawn from all sections of the country. Just because of the standing of the commissioners, efforts to impugn their rectitude and wisdom tend to cast doubt on the whole leadership of American society. Moreover, there seems to be increasing tendency to hint that President Johnson himself, as the one person who might be said to have benefited, was in some way responsible for the assassination. Innuendo of such seriousness affects not only the individual concerned, but also the whole reputation of the American government. Our organization itself is directly involved. Okay. Among the facts, we contributed information to the investigation, which they did. Conspiracy theories, okay, there's the term, have frequently thrown suspicion on our organization, for example, by falsely alleging that Lee Harvey Oswald worked for us. Falsely, okay, falsely. The aim of this dispatch is to provide material for countering and discrediting the claims of conspiracy theorists, as to inhibit the circulation of such claims in other countries. Now, the reason they say this is because the CIA is really not supposed to operate on American soil. That's part of their charter. So they're saying, we want to send all this information kind of / propaganda so that people in other countries will be influenced, not necessarily America itself. Okay. Background information is supplied in a classified selection and in a number of classified attachments. Action. We do not recommend the discussion of the assassination question to be initiated where it is not already taking place. So they don't want to bring it up. They do not want to discuss the assassination of JFK unless someone else brings it up. Where discussion is active, however, addresses are requested. Let's go on. A, to discuss the publicity problem with liaison and friendly elite contacts, especially politicians and editors. So the CIA has some influence over politicians and editors who determine what we read and what news are happening. Now let's go on. Pointing out the Warren Commission made as thorough an investigation as humanly possible. No, they didn't. We'll get into that. That the charges of the critics are without serious foundation and that further speculative discussion only plays into the hands of the opposition. Point out that parts of the conspiracy talk appear to be deliberately generated by communist propagandists. Not American propagandists who we need to get our information from. Urge them to influence to urge them to use their influence to discourage unfounded and irresponsible speculation. Do not speculate, do not think, do not look at the man behind the Iron Curtain. B, to employ propaganda assets. So the CIA wants to employ, quote, propaganda assets. And we'll get into the definition of what propaganda is in a minute, to answer and refute the attacks of the critics. So they want their propaganda assets to refute the attacks of people who are criticizing the Warren Report, which is basically their definition that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman and that there was no conspiracy at all. None at all with JFK. It was one guy with one gun and a man on a mission, and he just lucked out, found the right job where the president just happened to be having the motorcade go by. So that's what the CIA wants you to think. We'll get into the Warren Report in a minute. Book reviews and feature articles are particularly appropriate for this purpose. The unclassified attachments to this guidance should provide useful background material for passage to our assets. Now, the CIA has assets. In America, we're supposed to have a separation between the American government and press. We're supposed to have a free press, freedom of the press is in the Constitution, but yet an American agency has government assets who are not letting us know they work for the CIA, working for the CIA. So this is called propaganda. And now they talked about dismissing any critics as Russian propaganda, but they want to have their own propaganda in there. Our place should point out as applicable that the critics are whether the theories adopted before the evidence was in, okay, they're biased, politically interested, right-wing conspiracists, left-wing conspiracists, financially interested, okay, he's just doing it to sell books, hasty and inaccurate in their research, okay, so they're telling these people to make these criticisms before they've read the books. Like, hear your criticisms of the books before you've read the books, which is, I don't know, aren't journalists supposed to like read and investigate and not just listen to what some government figure is telling them? Interesting. This is a very interesting document right here. In course of discussion of the whole phenomenon of criticism, a useful strategy made to be single out Epstein's theory. That is not Jeffrey Epstein, it's J. Epstein, who wrote articles and books about the JFK assassination, using the attached Fletcher Knebel article and Spectator piece for the background. Although Mark Lane's book is much less convincing than Epstein's and comes off badly where contestant is knowledgeable critics, it is much more difficult to answer as a whole as one becomes lost in a morass of unrelated details. So it's a lot of words right here, but basically we kind of see that the CIA, right, is using the term conspiracy theory as a way to degrade people, as a way to degrade critics, as a way to kind of negate their points, as a way to ridicule them. And they have their friends in the media who do not do investigation, who do not do what journalists do, and they're asking them, here's how you dismiss these critics. Do not read their books, do not actually critique what they're doing, just here's what you say about them, point blank. And if you look at like the way a lot of the media reacts to so-called conspiracy theories and a lot of really well-done research books, it's still going on with their articles and book reviews. They're still dismissing it. And when you have someone who promotes the Warren Commission's view, it doesn't matter how horrible their journalism is or how politically motivated they are. These books will be praised, while legitimate criticisms of the kind of mainstream narrative that's been going on since the Warren Report are criticized in the way we have. So let's move on. So what's propaganda, right? We hear them talking about their propaganda assets. Dissemination of information, facts, argument, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence the public opinion. So they're using their propaganda assets to influence the public to believe the Warren Report and not believe the critics who have legitimate criticism of them. Okay, that's what propaganda is. Now, what the CIA does is covert action. They're known as a Central Intelligence Agency, known for intelligence gathering. So intelligence gathering is you go to another country and you report what's going on. You go to a foreign country, you go to Jamaica and say, hey, there's some communists and Rastafarians in Jamaica that you know. You might go to China and say, hey, they got a big communist party going on right here. And you might report on what's going on and the politics of China. You say, hey, there's communism going on here. There might be a war, and you report back to your government. That's not what the CIA does. What the CIA does is covert action. Covert action is when you go into someone else's country and you actively try and influence what's going on. And a lot of this has been anti-communist action. So the CIA will go into a communist country and they will aid the capitalist country or aid the right wing or the drug dealers or the Nazis or whoever is opposing the communists, the Islamic fundamentalists, whoever is opposing the communists, they'll aid them. So let's look at the definition again. The covert action is codified in Title 50 U.S. Code as an activity or activities of the U.S. government to influence political, economic, or military conditions abroad, where it is intended that the role of the United States will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly. So again, covert means secret. So what they're doing is secret actions, and that was a conspiracy, planning in secret. So what is the CIA doing with covert action? They are planning in secret to affect the political, economic, or military conditions of other countries. And it's not like they're doing good things. They're not saying, hey, let's go make the political economy of Cuba a lot better. Let's go give them some gifts, or let's help out the military of Venezuela. No, when they talk about influencing, it's influencing negatively. So this could be a military coup, this could be a revolution, this could be protests, could be influencing election, could be numerous things that covert action could fall under. So what the CIA is doing is they're planning in secret to do actions that are harmful to other governments. Now, when they talk about influencing economic or military conditions or political conditions abroad, they're not talking about giving them gifts and making them a happy people. This is what we call destabilization. So what the CIA will do, and especially did a lot in the Cold War, is there's a communist country, they'll go to the communist country and they'll aid the people who are fighting the communists. So this has been a consistent pattern of the CIA, and we'll look into a couple examples of what they did. All right. June 27th, 1954, elected Guatemalan leader overthrown in CIA-backed coup. So basically what the CIA did is they overthrew a government. Now, that is a crime here, right? The Trump supporters who ran up on January 6th, they were charged of trying to overthrow the government. Now, this is a harmful, possibly illegal thing that the CIA is doing. So this is a conspiracy. They conspired with members of the Guatemalan government to have a coup and overthrow the democratically elected leader. So let's read a little more. On June 27th, 1954, democratically elected Guatemalan president Jacobo Arbenz Guzman was deposed in a CIA-sponsored coup to protect the profits of the United Fruit Company. Arbenz was replaced by decades of brutal U.S.-backed regimes who committed widespread torture and genocide. So again, CIA conspired to overthrow the government of Guatemala. Again, let's go just 1 year before that. CIA-assisted coup overthrows government of Iran. The Iranian military, with the support and financial assistance of the United States government, overthrows the government of Premier Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstates the Shah of Iran. Iran remained a solid Cold War ally of the United States until a revolution ended the Shah's rule in 1979. So everybody who has these big problems with Iran being crazy religious fundamentalists, they weren't always that way. But Iran was a nice secular state, and the governments of Britain and America decided to overthrow that government. Why? Because they wanted oil. So this was another conspiracy. The CIA conspired with the Iranian military to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. Conspiracy. Now, we talked before about the mafia and how the mafia conspires, right? Apparently, the CIA conspires with the mafia. Now, you have all sorts of gangsters like Johnny Roselli, Santo Trafficante. Who else we have out there? Momo Giancana, Sam Giancana, all these notorious gangsters we watch all these documentaries about how bad they were and how much drugs they sold and how many people they killed. They actually were involved with the CIA to kill Fidel Castro. This was a conspiracy. We have the CIA conspiring with the mafia to kill Fidel Castro. Why did they want to kill Fidel Castro? They did not like what he was doing with his power. They did not want to see communism spread. So they started a conspiracy. The mafia who conspire, right? We all know that. CIA, they conspire to overthrow governments. The mafia conspires to sell drugs and kill people. And they both had an interest in Cuba. So those unfamiliar, before Fidel, they had a real corrupt president by the name of Batista who ran Cuba, and he had a lot of friends in the mafia like Meyer Lansky, like Santo Trafficante, and he basically let them run the casinos out there, move all their drugs throughout there. So when he was deposed by Fidel Castro, the mafia wanted to take Cuba back, and America was mad at Fidel for being communist. So you had two people conspiring because they both had a common enemy. The mafia wanted to get rid of Fidel, CIA wanted to get rid of Fidel, so they conspired to kill him. Now, November 22nd, 1963 will be a day that lives in infamy because John F. Kennedy was killed. And according to the mainstream narrative of the Warren Commission, one lone gunman with a gun he bought from Sears Roebuck just decided to kill Kennedy, and he was at the right place, the right time, lucky guy, lucky shot, and he was unfortunately killed before he could be prosecuted, before we could find out that he was just a lone gunman and there was no conspiracy. So all these conspiracy theorists are running around now. After Kennedy was killed, he was replaced with LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Lyndon Baines Johnson was the man who started the Warren Report, commissioned it. Now, for those who watch detective shows, true crime, when you investigate something, you gotta look at who would have motive to kill Kennedy, right? Who would have motive? Johnson might have motive to kill Kennedy. What happens if Kennedy gets killed? He becomes the president. But instead of being investigated, he does the investigating. So when you investigate a drug dealer, you do not ask the drug dealer to investigate themselves. You don't say, hey, Big Meech, you selling any cocaine? Oh, no cocaine? Okay. So why don't you investigate? And then Big Meech will come back with the Big Meech report, and he'll say, here's what we did today. We went to the club. We did not deal drugs. We went to the club. We did not deal drugs. And he will present his report, and Big Meech will be free. If that's the way, if the way the Warren report worked for drug dealers, like the way it worked for politicians, like no drug dealer would ever be arrested because you're asking these people for their help. So Kennedy was killed by a sniper, right? As he rides in Dallas, and Johnson was sworn in immediately after. Now, immediately after, what came was naturally was people were speculating because they did not believe the lies. November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy was killed by a sniper as he rode in a car in Dallas. Immediately after, Johnson was sworn in. Now, the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, did not get a chance to defend himself before he was killed, but he did have certain words where he declared himself a patsy. Now, a patsy is a scapegoat and someone who is blamed for something they didn't do. So that's what basically he said before he was killed, his words to defend himself.
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man.
Come on, man. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
President.
So the man who shot him was a man by the name of Jack Ruby. Now, according to the Warren Commission, Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald because he had so much love for Jacqueline Kennedy that he did not want to see her go through a trial. So instead of letting her find some justice and find, some conviction or get some closure, he shoots this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, in the Dallas police station in front of everybody on a certain dummy crash test mission. Now, what the Warren Report didn't report about Jack Ruby was he was a seriously mobbed up guy. Like he went back to the days of Al Capone in Chicago. He was running guns with Santo Trafficante, who was like the big mob boss of Tampa, who was involved in the JFK assassination. So he was, and the Bay of Pigs. So he was involved with a lot of people who were involved in Cuba and the mafia down there. And they didn't investigate any of this. According to the Warren Commission, he just was a crazy man who decided to shoot another crazy man because he did not want a woman who he didn't know, who he saw on TV, to have to go to a trial, and he wanted her to have to deal with conspiracy theories and not knowing about who shot her husband by killing him. So that's kind of the Warren Report on that. Now, the biggest flaw for me, especially if you watch the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, is the magic bullet theory. Now, in order to make the JFK assassination make sense, what they had to do is have to create a magic bullet that created 7 wounds. Now, I play video games. I've seen action movies, and only in like the most Looney Tune cartoons, unrealistic ever, as you're going to see a bullet hit 7 people. So the theory that they used to blame Lee Harvey Oswald was that he shot one shot that caused 7 wounds. And the other thing, if you look at it, like they say that Lee Harvey Oswald was behind JFK, right? And so his shot came from here. Now, they didn't have the Zapruder film, and I'm not going to show it. You could watch the Zapruder film, and you could watch Seinfeld too. You could clearly see that JFK's head goes back into the left. So if you're getting hit from right here, boom, you go back into the left. What they're trying to say is the bullet came from here, but the bullet went here and circled around. And again, two magic bullets. It really breaks the laws of physics. I took AP physics in high school. You know what I'm saying? I know what I'm talking about. They might have some lying expert to try and tell you to remove your common sense because they're some smart guy, but no, that person is a liar trying to trick you. Do not believe them. Now, another one of the big flaws of the JFK assassination was they appointed Allen Dulles to be part of the Warren Commission. Now, Allen Dulles was head of the CIA, and he was fired by JFK after the Bay of Pigs. So the Bay of Pigs was a big conspiracy by the CIA to overthrow Castro. They tried to invade his island. It didn't work. Castro wasn't having it. He told all those CIA guys, get out of here. He actually sold some of the CIA guys back to America. And the CIA wanted JFK to like help him out and bring in the American military and bomb Cuba. And JFK wasn't really having that. He didn't want to start no war that they started. So the CIA hated him. He fired Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles hated JFK for his whole life. Prescott Bush wrote a letter to Allen Dulles' wife, right? When Allen Dulles died, talking about, I hate those Kennedy bastards forever, and I hate them for firing you. And that's kind of, we see both Prescott Bush and Allen Dulles both kind of hated JFK. So this is, by appointing him to the Warren Commission, is like Dexter. For those who've seen the show Dexter, not the cartoon, but the one with the serial killer, like you see, the reason he's the reason he's able to get away with being a serial killer is he's also an investigator. So he investigates himself, and when he investigates himself, he covers it up. So if you were really to have so this is basically like if you investigate 9 Trey and you make Shotty the chief investigator. Like, how is a leader from a gang gonna investigate that gang? Don't make no sense. Big fatal flaw of the Warren Commission. There's a wonderful book by David Talbot that really breaks down how Allen Dulles was involved in the JFK assassination. Now, this was the same guy who was head of the CIA when they overthrew Guatemala, when they overthrew Iran. He was the same director of the CIA who was behind all like the plots to kill Castro with the mafia. So he's conspiring with the mafia. He's conspiring to overthrow governments, but no, never, never, never would they conspire to overthrow an American government. Just those other third world governments, not here, right? Okay. Now, there was another really good book by a couple people. We have Roger Stone. Roger Stone, who was, Trump's consigliere. He actually wrote a really good book about the man who killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ. Now, not only was Roger Stone involved with Trump, but he was also involved with Nixon. He was a Nixon aide, so we got inside information. There was another good book, The Mastermind of JFK's Assassination by Philip F. Nelson. I don't know if LBJ was necessarily the mastermind, but in order for the assassination to be covered up, if it was part of a conspiracy, you would definitely need a president to cover it up. So he definitely had some role if it was a conspiracy, which I don't want to be conspiracy theorist though. Now, one big conspiracy in history was Watergate. Now, a lot of people are familiar with Watergate and do know that there was a conspiracy going on. A whole bunch of people conspired to break into the DNC headquarters of the Watergate building, and then a whole bunch of other people conspired to cover it up. But a lot of people don't know how far the conspiracy actually went, and that conspiracy is actually connected to the JFK assassination. So if you look at the Watergate burglars, right, all of them were kind of connected to the CIA. A lot of people are familiar with Watergate. It was kind of the big scandal that brought Nixon down, but a lot of people really don't know the full story of Watergate. Now, if you look at all the original Watergate burglars, we got James McCord, Virgilio Gonzalez, Frank Sturgis, Eugenio Martinez, and Bernard Baker. Now, all of these guys were either connected to the CIA, the FBI, or the Bay of Pigs. So they were conspired before to overthrow Fidel Castro. Now they're conspiring for some reason to break into the DNC headquarters and bug it and steal it. Very interesting. E. Howard Hunt was the man kind of behind the burglars. He was the kind of boss. He was organizing. They found a check in one of the burglars' wallets from E. Howard Hunt. Now, E. Howard Hunt is an old school CIA guy. He actually was part of the OSS, which was the kind of World War II version of the CIA before it evolved to the CIA. He was very involved in the overthrow of the president of Guatemala. He was very involved in the Bay of Pigs, and he was very involved with these kind of anti-Castro Cubans who kind of formed this Brigade 2506 infamous kind of brigade. So he was a very important guy for the CIA who went on to work for Richard Nixon as one of the so-called White House plumbers or members of CREEP, Commission to Re-elect the President. And this was kind of like the Dirty Tricks Committee. And it's really unclear, though, was E. Howard Hunt working for Richard Nixon or was he working for the CIA? Now, he was retired from the CIA when he started working for Nixon, but one thing about people who work for the CIA is they really never stop working for the CIA. So there was a trial in 1985 involving E. Howard Hunt. Now, Mark Lane was an attorney for the Liberty Lobby, which was a right-wing organization that published an article claiming that the CIA was eventually going to have to let the world know why E. Howard Hunt was in Dallas on the date of JFK's assassination. Now, he'd been questioned a lot before, and he'd had a kind of denial, and he had some people to kind of back him up and say he was in D.C., but there was a big trial of Mark Lane representing the Liberty Lobby versus E. Howard Hunt, who sued him for libel. He sued Liberty Lobby for libel. Now, Mark Lane has been a big JFK assassination lawyer, kind of expert since the Warren report. So I think he jumped on this chance to kind of prove his point in front of a court of law. And he won. He won the court. E. Howard Hunt did not win the libel case, proving kind of that in at least from one court of law that there was a conspiracy to kill JFK. And he had a lot of good witnesses. This is a really good book, and it's really based on the whole court trial. So you have a lot of documents and everything's under oath. There's lots of court documents. It's, really well organized, really well thought out. Not a lot of speculation, not a lot of theory, just really facts and evidence. So after E. Howard Hunt loses this libel case where he's accused of being part of the JFK assassination, years later, before he dies, he gives a tape to his son where he admits to being part of the JFK assassination, saying he was a bench warmer in the big event, which was the killing of JFK. And so let's listen to his confession.
Or keeping it totally secret. I think that LBJ settled on Meyer as an opportunist, Perrin like himself, a Perrin, and a man who had very little left to him in life ever since JFK had taken Cord's wife as one of his mistresses. And of course, could not number Cord Meyer among JFK's admirers. Quite the contrary.
So now you have 3 CIA officials who had, let's say, the means, motive, and opportunity, or some connection to kill Kennedy.
That's true.
All right, so it's a very interesting confession. Again, E. Howard Hunt is a kind of lifelong professional liar who has told story after story. When you have someone make a statement, what you do is you try and corroborate it. You investigate it. That just because he said that's what happened doesn't mean that would happen. Are there other people who can say that? Is there evidence that backs up what he said? So that's what we're going to look into. All right. So when he talked about Mary Pinchot Meyer and Cord Meyer, he talked about JFK having an affair with Cord Meyer's wife. Now, this was true. Now, they divorced, and after they divorced, she began having an affair with JFK. And allegedly, she had knowledge of the JFK assassination, according to Peter Janney, who wrote a book, Mary's Mosaic. Now, Peter Janney was another son of a CIA agent, and he kind of was in this kind of circle of like the Washington Post editors and all these CIA agents. And in his book, he claimed that Mary Pinchot Meyer was murdered by the CIA. Now, she was killed, and they blamed it on a black man. They blamed it on a black man by the name of Ray Crump. And Ray Crump, I guess they figured he wouldn't have any type of defense, but he actually had a really good black woman lawyer, and she got him off. So they tried to frame a black guy for the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer. It didn't work, so I guess it's kind of like an unsolved murder. But according to Peter Janney, she was killed by the CIA because she knew about the JFK assassination. And she knew that Cord Meyer was involved, and other people like James Jesus Angleton and even Ben Bradley, who was the kind of editor of the Washington Post at the time, she said was kind of covering up her diary so her diary wouldn't get out and people wouldn't know the truth behind the JFK assassination. Another person that E. Howard Hunt mentioned is David Morales, a.k.a. El Indio, because of his complexion. He was one of the darker-skinned Cuban CIA agents. So we here see at the Mary Farrell Foundation, After Morales' retirement in 1975, he returned to his native Arizona and died of a heart attack in 1978. HSC investigator Gaetan Fonzi traced Morales to Willcox, Arizona shortly after Morales' death and talked to his lifelong friend Ruben Carbajal and business associate of Morales named Bob Walton. Walton told Fonzi for an evening after many drinks when Morales went on to a tirade about Kennedy and particularly his failure to support the men of the Bay of Pigs. Morales finished the conversation saying, "Well, look, we took care of that son of a bitch, didn't we?" Carbajal, who had been present at the convention, corroborated it. Okay. Another man mentioned by E. Howard Hunt was William Harvey. Now, William Harvey was a notorious old school CIA agent who worked with people like James Jesus Angleton, another notorious CIA agent. And one thing that William Harvey did do was he set up the Russian defector program, which sent American military people over to Russia as spies, as so-called defectors. So they say, hey, I'm fed up with America. This is a classic like mafia tool. You say, I'm fed up with America. I want to go with the other gang. And then you go to the other gang and you report back to your old gang what they were doing. So that's kind of what Lee Harvey Oswald did. Lee Harvey Oswald went to Russia and magically came back after defecting. Nobody questioned him anything. Never questioned by the CIA, allegedly never questioned. That's what William Harvey did. And he was accused by E. Howard Hunt as being having played a major part in the JFK assassination. Another person E. Howard Hunt mentioned was Frank Sturgis. Now, Frank Sturgis was also caught in Watergate, as you might remember, as working for E. Howard Hunt. Now, another woman by the name of Marita Lorenz would claim that Frank Sturgis had her involved in a plot to kill Kennedy, and she kind of backed out. So they gave her some pills. She knew Castro from before as a, she was a young, hot woman at the time, young, hot German girl. They sent her to kill Castro, gave him some pills. She couldn't do it, fell in love with Castro, but they still kept working with her. Now, Marita Lorenz claims that Frank Sturgis was involved in the JFK assassination and told her all about it in this video.
I asked Sturgis, Jesus Christ, Frank, did you shoot the president? Did you have something to do with that? He said, who gives a shit? Yeah, who's going to prove it? He said, we kill a lot of people. What the hell's the difference? Look what he did to the Bay of Pigs. Look what he did. He let the black people go, gave them all their rights. He didn't want Vietnam. They had good reason.
Marita Lorenz was the kind of lead witness for the trial against E. Howard Hunt, and she claimed that E. Howard Hunt went by the codename Eduardo, and he was kind of the paymaster who was paying all these people going to Dallas on the way to kill JFK, and and they won the trial. So we've seen Marita Lorenz claim that Frank Sturgis was part of the JFK assassination. So let's let Frank Sturgis kind of speak for himself. He actually did an interview with Bill O'Reilly in 1977. Now, Bill O'Reilly was a reporter for WFAA in Dallas, and he actually did a lot of coverage on the JFK assassination. So he actually asked Frank Sturgis a couple of tough questions about the JFK assassination and Watergate. So let's look what Sturgis has to say.
They were involved up to their eyeballs. They knew everything that the plumbers were doing.
Who was Deep Throat?
Robert Bennett, I believe. Yeah.
Background.
President of the Mullins Company. Plus, he was a CIA official. Mullins Company was used as a front for Central Intelligence Agency.
Why would he leak information about Watergate?
He was ordered to by the director of CIA.
Richard Helms.
Richard Helms at that time.
Okay, who is leaking information to the CIA from inside the White House?
Howard Hunt did have an office in the White House, all right? You had Butterfield there.
Butterfield was CIA?
Well, I'd say personally that Butterfield probably had a good possibility that he had an association with CIA officials. You had General Haig.
General Haig had ties to the CIA.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sturgis says the combined information from Hunt, Butterfield, and Haig was edited by the CIA and fed to Bennett, who then gave most of it to Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Sturgis goes on to say that the decision to politically ruin Nixon was made after Nixon demanded to see CIA files on the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and, most importantly, the file on the assassination of President Kennedy.
Several times the president asked Mr. Helms for the file, and Mr. Helms refused direct order from the President of the United States.
Why? What good would that do Richard Nixon to get those files?
I believe that Nixon would have uncovered the true facts that had been covered up for many years about the assassination of the president. It would take the heat off of him on Watergate.
Do you think that Richard Nixon was ever in any physical danger?
Yes, absolutely. He's lucky he didn't get killed. He's lucky he didn't get assassinated like President Kennedy got assassinated.
All right, now this is a very interesting video, a lot to read into. So in that interview, we see Frank Sturgis making some pretty outrageous claims that the CIA was behind Watergate to get Nixon out of office, and that Nixon was in danger for his life because he was asking about these kind of the JFK files. He was asking about who shot JFK. Here we see Sturgis talking about Watergate being a CIA operation. So Deep Throat was the source for Woodward and Bernstein that allowed them to kind of journalistically take down Richard Nixon, which led to his resignation. And according to Frank Sturgis, Deep Throat was CIA, and the CIA was trying to get rid of Richard Nixon, and that Richard Nixon was asking for these kind of files on the JFK assassination from the CIA, and the CIA didn't want to give them to him, so they got rid of him, and that he almost got killed like Kennedy because he was asking for the CIA files. Now, again, Frank Sturgis, maybe not the most trustworthy character in the world, so we got to look for corroboration. I actually found some audio between Nixon and CIA Director Richard Helms where he's asking for the CIA files. So let's take a listen.
My second, with regard to, I needed for a defensive reason, well, the one instance for negotiation, that's one thing I needed. And the other instance, I needed because due to the miserable on paper, due to the fact that we now enter the end of the war, the who shot John thing, is Eisenhower blind, is Johnson to blind, is Kennedy to blind, is Nixon to blind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, may become, not by me, but may become a very, very vigorous issue. If it does, I need to know what is necessary to protect, frankly, the intelligence gathering and the dirty tricks department, and I will protect it. Listen, I've done more than my share of walking to protect it, and I will do it. I believe it's totally right to do it. On the other hand, if I don't know, then what do you have? You haven't seen the final situation. I don't believe you can say that, well, the CIA, whoever is the director of the CIA, or his successor, has an obligation to, that he is the only one who is to know what happens in certain circumstances where a president is approved, and that the president's successor is not to know, even though the president's successor is in a position where tangentially even he may have to come up against. Now, you do have this problem, I will agree. You can say, well, the president's successor might be a political son of a bitch that's going to cut us up, or cut up his predecessor. That's possible. But let's look at the other way around. What about the CIA successor? I mean, it is there. You burn the documents. You say, well, we're going to do it. I go out, somebody else comes in. I think this is one of the words Hoover. I mean, how a lot of smoke's going to come out. We have reality. Wouldn't you think so?
Either that or they're going to make 14 bands up there like they did in the
like the new Pope. Well, here's the thing. I think the real problem that I think I'm glad you understand is I actually should have talked to you regularly. The real thing you need to have from me is first this assurance. I am not going to embarrass the CIA because it's terribly important. Second, I believe in dirty tricks.
All right, so let's look at what Nixon was kind of saying to Dick Helms, he's basically asking for the CIA files on who shot John, and he's not saying that he needs it for himself. He's saying, I need it so I can lie for you. I need it so I can protect Langley. I need to know it because I've been lying for you guys, and I will continue to lie for you guys, and I believe in your dirty tricks, but he wants to know. So just because he wanted to know about the JFK assassination, this is kind of allegedly, at least why Frank Sturgis says that that Nixon was taken out, which was another kind of thing. So if you look at JFK, according to sorts of people, it was not only an assassination, it was a coup that you get rid of the president who's in power, you take him out. Also with Nixon, they got rid of the person in power because they didn't like him. He wasn't cooperating like they used to, so they used Watergate, at least according to Frank Sturgis. Another person that E. Howard Hunt mentioned was Antonio Veciana. Now, Antonio Veciana has recently come forward and admitted that he was involved in a conspiracy to kill the president and has blamed David Atlee Phillips, another person named by E. Howard Hunt, as his handler. So let's watch this video of, once again, Mr. Bill O'Reilly interviewing Antonio Veciana, yet again interviewing another person who E. Howard Hunt alleged to be involved in the JFK assassination.
In Dallas, Oswald was befriended by Russian-born George de Mohrenschildt. Investigators determined he was a contract agent for the CIA in Central America and the Caribbean. In 1977, moments before he was to be interviewed by House investigators, de Mohrenschildt blew his brains out with a 20-gauge shotgun. House investigators believe he was a crucial link between the CIA and Lee Harvey Oswald.
There is no question that the sealed JFK files are extremely embarrassing for the CIA. House investigators have told Inside Edition that the agency did not fully cooperate in their investigation and that the CIA had final say in the report that the House Assassinations Committee made public. Thus, the public report makes no mention of the CIA's links with Lee Harvey Oswald. But the secret documents are another story.
One interesting sidelight, the movie JFK was partially based on Jim Garrison's investigation in New Orleans. Well, House investigators uncovered evidence that the CIA planted 9 agents inside the Garrison investigation to feed him false information and to report back to Langley on what Garrison was finding out.
So Bill's talking about a lot of stuff involving the JFK assassination right here. One thing he's talking about is the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which happened in 1978. And he actually had a good source on that, which was by the name of Gaetan Fonzi, who was one of the lead investigators for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Now, another man by the name of Robert Blakey was the kind of lead investigator, the lead investigator for the HSCA. And Robert Blakey came to the conclusion that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, but it did not involve the CIA, that it just involved organized crime. More recently, in interviews, he said that the CIA kind of misled him and didn't give him the right amount of information, and that's why he came to that conclusion. So a lot of these documents that we see Bill O'Reilly talking about are supposed to be released right now, and they're supposed to be released under Trump, and there's a campaign to get Biden to release them. We'll see if that happens. And another person he mentioned was George de Mohrenschildt, who killed himself before he was going to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And there's a lot of people who were supposed to testify before that committee who died, especially the mobsters. Like you have people like Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and both of these guys were big mobsters allegedly involved in the JFK assassination who were killed right before they were supposed to testify, which is a good way of stopping people from testifying. Another person was George de Mohrenschildt, who we saw O'Reilly bring up, who blew his brains out. Now, de Mohrenschildt was very close with Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was also close with Allen Dulles. He was also close with George H.W. Bush. Now, here's another video from a Dutch journalist who testified that George de Mohrenschildt told him about a conspiracy to kill JFK. Now, here's a video about George de Mohrenschildt after he died and what he actually told a Dutch journalist about the JFK assassination before he was unfortunately committed suicide or allegedly committed suicide.
The Assassination Committee heard a remarkable tale today concerning a plot to kill President Kennedy from a Dutch journalist. Vic Ratner reports from Washington.
For 3 hours, Willem Oltmans was questioned closely about his uncorroborated story by the House Assassinations Committee. Although his committee testimony is secret, in public, Oltmans claimed that he'd been told of a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, allegedly involving Texas oil interests, the late millionaire H.L. Hunt, 3 anti-Castro Cuban gunmen, Lee Harvey Oswald, and George de Mohrenschildt, a friend of Oswald's who committed suicide this week when the Assassinations Committee tried to get him to testify.
Mr. de Mohrenschildt told me in Dallas on the 23rd of February this year, that Oswald acted at his instructions and that they discussed the Kennedy assassination from A to Z, and that he knew that Kennedy was going to kill Oswald was going to kill President Kennedy sooner or later.
Very interesting. One man he mentioned went by the name H.L. Hunt. Now, H.L. Hunt is a notorious Dallas oil tycoon. He actually owned the Kansas City Chiefs. I think one of his sons or his grandchildren owns the Kansas City Chiefs now. Now, H.L. Hunt also was a person who not only funded the Ku Klux Klan and the right-wing John Birch Society, but he was the person who gave the Nation of Islam their money and the person funding Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm X would actually bring this up in a speech before anyone kind of accused H.L. Hunt of being involved in the JFK assassination. Malcolm X wouldn't name him by name, but he would clearly indicate that H.L. Hunt was involved in the JFK assassination in a speech that he made 6 days before Malcolm X was assassinated himself. So let's listen to Malcolm's speech.
And I guess many of you have heard it said that his financial support comes from a rich man in Texas. I heard that while I was in the movement. I've heard it more since I left the movement. A rich man in Texas. You can look up, any of you can look up his name. But the FBI knows that too. But they still don't touch him. And never have I seen a man, and this rich man who lives in Texas, by the way, lives in Dallas. His headquarters in Dallas. His money is in Dallas. The same cities where President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And never have I seen a man in my life more afraid, more frightened than Elijah Muhammad was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I've never in my life seen a man as frightened as he was. And when I made the statement that I did, why, he almost cracked up behind it, because there were all kinds of implications to it that at that time were way above and beyond my understanding.
So those unfamiliar, Malcolm's original statement after JFK was killed, that he called it the chickens coming home to roost. So he's saying he didn't basically even understand his implications, that it was basically the CIA American chickens coming home to roost to kill JFK, when he's kind of speaking on that. And Malcolm never got a chance to really elaborate on that because he was killed 6 days later at the Audubon Ballroom. A few days before that, the CIA had rented it out to kind of check out the landscape. Maybe a coincidence, maybe a Cojspircacy. But we're going to definitely get into the assassination of Malcolm X and give him the whole full episode treatment. But that's Malcolm's take on the JFK assassination. So another person that George de Mohrenschildt was friends with was George Bush, the 41st president of the United States, the 40th vice president of the United States, and also the CIA director in 1976. So not only is George de Mohrenschildt friends with Lee Harvey Oswald, he was also friends with Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, and George H.W. Bush, director of the CIA. George de Mohrenschildt, towards the end of his life, he was allegedly getting harassed by FBI agents, and luckily for him, he had a friend who was director of the CIA. So he writes his old buddy, George Bush. This guy, Oswald's friend, decides to write to his new friend, George Bush. What a wonderful 2 degrees of separation these guys have. So let's look what George de Mohrenschildt had to say to George Bush. Dear George, you will excuse this handwritten letter. Maybe you will be able to bring a solution to the hopeless situation I find myself in. My wife and I find ourselves surrounded by some vigilantes. Our phone is bugged and we are being followed everywhere. Either FBI is involved in this or they do not want to accept my complaints. We are driven to insanity by the situation. I have been behaving like a damn fool ever since my daughter Nadia died from cystic fibrosis over 3 years ago. I tried to write stupidly and unsuccessfully about Lee H. Oswald and must have angered a lot of people. Who did he anger? I don't know. I do not know. But to punish an elderly man like myself and my highly nervous and sick wife is really too much. Could you do something to remove the net around us? This will be my last request for help, and I will not annoy you anymore. Good luck in your important job. Thank you, George de Mohrenschildt. So let's look what George Bush had to write back to George de Mohrenschildt. Dear George, please forgive the delay in the reply to your September 5th letter. It took time to explore thoroughly the matters you raised. Let me first say that I know it must have been difficult for you to seek my help in the situation outlined in your letter. I believe I can appreciate your state of mind in view of your daughter's tragic death a few years ago and the current poor state of your wife's health. I was extremely sorry to hear these circumstances. In your situation, I can well imagine the attention you described in your letter affect both you and your wife. However, my staff has been unable to find any indication or interest in your activities on the part of the federal authorities in recent years. The flurry of interest that has attended your testimony before the Warren Commission has long since subsided. I can only speculate that you may have become newsworthy again in view of the renewed interest in the Kennedy assassination, and thus may be attracting the attention of people in the media, not FBI, people in the media. I hope this letter has been some comfort to you, George, although I realize I am unable to answer your question completely. Okay, interesting. I don't see where he's not answering the question completely. Thank you for your good wishes on my new job. As you can imagine, I'm finding it interesting and challenging. Very truly yours, George Bush, Director, CIA. So George Bush was director of the CIA in 1976, and there's a really amazing book by Russ Baker, who's a really great journalist, that kind of traces the Bush family back to from when Prescott Bush was dealing with the Nazis and trying to overthrow Roosevelt, to George Bush's early days in World War II, to him being actually a CIA agent in the 60s, undercovers working for Zapata Oil, to being involved in the JFK assassination and later Iran-Contra. It's all one big conspiracy. But all fairness, let's let George Bush have the kind of final say in defending himself and defending the JFK assassination, because, you know, George Bush, he got to be a decent guy, right? He's the president of the United States. Ain't no way he was involved in killing another president. So let's watch this video of George Bush at Gerald Ford's funeral speaking on the JFK assassination.
A deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others to make...
I know, let's rewind that a little. He seems a little happy in the beginning. Let's pull it back from the beginning. Boom, boom, boom. And he says,
after a deluded gunman...
Look at that smile. Wow. What a smile to have at someone's funeral. Like, after a deluded gunman killed JFK, what is so funny about a deluded gunman killing a president? What would make you smile like that at a funeral? Who smiles at funerals? I can understand if you're talking about all the fun you used to have in the White House office, but you're talking about a president being killed and you're smiling.
After a deluded gunman...
Okay.
...assassinated President Kennedy, our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others to make sense of that madness. And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but the Warren Commission report will always have the final, definitive say on this tragic matter. Why? Because Jerry Ford put his name on it, and Jerry Ford's word was always good. After a deluded gunman...
So there we go, George Bush smiling at the JFK assassination. It's funny, right? It's just a big joke after a deluded gunman. No, but honestly, George Bush is an honest person. He's honest, and he doesn't conspire. So I'm sure he was just laughing. I'm sure he was just laughing because, like, he wasn't involved in the JFK assassination. No way. Like, no way, bro. Like, are you kidding me? That is the 41st president of the United States and the director of the CIA. And, you know, like, all the crack that wound up in our hoods had nothing to do with George H.W. Bush. He did not assassinate JFK. Like, you see, like, it was a deluded gunman. Case closed. All right, so in 1976, George H.W. Bush was actually head of the Central Intelligence Agency, but according to author Russ Baker, who actually wrote an amazing, full, multi-generational biography of the Bush family called Family of Secrets, George H.W. Bush was actually a CIA agent going back to the 1960s, undercover as an oil man working for Zapata Oil, and he was also involved in the Bay of Pigs, and subsequently also involved in the JFK assassination. Now, this is a really fascinating book by Russ Baker. I recommend everybody read it. If you aren't into reading with your eyes, you get the audio book. He's done a lot of good interviews on the subject as well. But actually, there are documents that show that George H.W. Bush was somewhat involved in the JFK assassination and connected to these kind of anti-Castro Cubans who were allegedly some of the gunmen who killed Kennedy. So let's look at these documents. At 1:46 p.m., George H.W. Bush, president of Zapata Offshore Drilling Company, Houston, Texas, residence 525 Briar House, and telephonically furnished the following information to writer by long-distance telephone from Tyler, Texas. Bush stated that he wanted to be kept confidential, but wanted to furnish hearsay that he recalled hearing in recent weeks, the day and source unknown. He stated that one James Parrott had been talking about killing the president when he comes to Houston. So this was on the day of the assassination of JFK. We have George H.W. Bush seemingly feeding misinformation to the FBI about the assassination of JFK. And also at the same time, he's kind of placing himself in Tyler, Texas, and not Dallas, Texas. Now, there's another document. This one is from actually J. Edgar Hoover, talking about another George Bush, or the same George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency, and how this George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency was the liaison between these anti-Castro Cubans and who wanted to invade Cuba after the assassination of Kennedy. Very interesting. So we have two documents connecting George H.W. Bush to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and if one were to believe the kind of theories that have been put forth in this whole episode, that the anti-Castro Cubans were indeed involved in the assassination of JFK, and George H.W. Bush was indeed involved with these kind of anti-Castro Cubans. And he's continued with these relationships, and we're going to get into a lot of his relationships later, specifically with a man by the name of Felix Rodriguez, who was an anti-Castro Cuban / drug dealer / assassin / CIA spy. So yeah, Mr. Bush does not have a good relationship with the truth, and he does not have a good relationship with Mr. Kennedy. And according to Russ Baker and several others, he was involved in the JFK assassination. There's another really good documentary about George Bush and the JFK assassination called Dark Legacy. And so watch Dark Legacy, read Family of Secrets, examine the documents, do some little research, and you'll kind of see that in order for something like the assassination of JFK to have, never been kind of solved, you need every kind of president after JFK to kind of hide these secrets. And who was the president after JFK? Who we had? We had your man Gerald Ford, who was on the Warren Commission, which kind of said there was no conspiracy to kill JFK. You had Nixon, who was kind of butted out. We've had Reagan, who did work for the CIA and was an FBI informant too. Reagan was an FBI informant. And then George H.W. Bush, who was the director of the CIA, and then Bill Clinton. We'll go on and on and on. It's not a full history. Now that we've looked at a lot of the critics of the Warren Report, it's time to look at some of its proponents, or the critics of the Warren Report. It's only right we show both sides of the story. Now, of all the books written about the JFK assassination, very, very few actually support the Warren Report's final say, but those that do get a lot of attention. They get a lot of publicity. One of the reasons, because some of them are big names. Now, one big name who has written about the JFK assassination, we've seen him before. We've seen him as a really good investigative journalist asking tough questions about the JFK assassination, but then he gets to write his book and there are no tough questions about it. In his former career as a journalist, he did a lot of good investigation on the JFK assassination, asking the right questions to the right people, to people like Frank Sturgis and Antonio Veciana, stuff that we've used in this documentary. But then he goes to Fox News and changes his tune, and he no longer questions the Warren Report and the findings of his friend Gaetan Fonzi. Now, Gaetan Fonzi was Bill O'Reilly's source while he was at WFAA working for Dallas, and when he was at Inside Edition in the 90s, and he was kind of feeding him his information on the JFK assassination, then Bill O'Reilly totally betrays Gaetan Fonzi and writes a book that all discredits all of Gaetan Fonzi's work and basically co-signs the Warren Commission. Now, one thing we do know in this book is that Bill O'Reilly is a liar. Now, in O'Reilly's book, Killing Kennedy, the narrative was a totally different narrative than all the investigative journalism he'd done before, asking tough questions to Frank Sturgis and Antonio Veciana. And now he's totally co-signing the Warren Report. Now, this is totally against his main source, Gaetan Fonzi. Now, Gaetan Fonzi was a journalist who worked in Philadelphia and in Miami and was one of the original critics of the Warren Report. So when they had the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Gaetan Fonzi was one of the lead investigators, and he would feed O'Reilly information. So that's why he got his information about George de Mohrenschildt and Jim Garrison, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one thing about O'Reilly's book is there's at least one major lie, because in the book, he claims he was there when George de Mohrenschildt committed suicide. However, recent audio shows that Gaetan Fonzi was the person who was around when George de Mohrenschildt committed suicide, and Bill O'Reilly was calling and asking about it. And we actually have that audio provided by Gaetan Fonzi's wife. So here is what Bill O'Reilly says in his book about George de Mohrenschildt. As the reporter knocked on the door of de Mohrenschildt's daughter's home, he heard the shotgun blast that marked the suicide of the Russian, assuring that his relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald would never be fully understood. By the way, that reporter's name was Bill O'Reilly. Now, here is what we have in Gaetan Fonzi's book. About 6:30 that evening, I received a call from Bill O'Reilly, a friend who was then a television reporter in Dallas. Funny thing happened, he said. We just aired a story that came over the wire from a Dutch journalist saying the Assassinations Committee had finally located de Mohrenschildt in South Florida. Now, de Mohrenschildt's attorney, a guy named Pat, calls and says de Mohrenschildt committed suicide this afternoon. So this is very interesting, that as soon as people find out where de Mohrenschildt is, he mysteriously committed suicide. Now, I'm not saying he was killed. It's possibly that he was harassed and he did not want to testify. He didn't want to do any of that. So he might have killed himself, but it's also possible that he may have been killed. Now, if what Bill O'Reilly is saying, Bill O'Reilly is leaving no room for him being killed, because Bill O'Reilly was there and he heard the gun and it was definitely a suicide. And now we'll never know. We will never know the relationship between Bill O'Reilly and Lee Harvey Oswald, between Lee Harvey Oswald and George de Mohrenschildt, because Bill O'Reilly said so. All right, now, not only did so Gaetan Fonzi's wife actually pulled out receipts after she read O'Reilly's book, claiming that he was the one to go investigate George de Mohrenschildt and find he committed suicide. And here's the audio.
Hi, Gaten, Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Look, something definitely did happen.
Yeah, I got it.
What is it?
He committed suicide up here in where I was trying to locate him.
Okay, where is that?
It's a place called Manalapan, M-A-N-A-L-A-P-A-N, Palm Beach County.
Okay, and that's a town, Manalapan?
Yeah, it's a section of Lantana.
Yeah.
Where the National Enquirer is.
Okay, so he committed suicide. He's dead.
Yeah.
Okay, what time?
Late this afternoon. I don't know.
Okay, gun?
I think he said he shot himself.
Okay. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Isn't that something? Jesus.
Now, we got to get this guy Epstein. I'm coming down there tomorrow. I'm coming to Florida. We got to get this guy. He knows what happened.
Well, I'm going to be up there probably trying to secure the papers.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm going to get in there tomorrow. I'm going to get a car.
Very interesting conversation we have with Bill O'Reilly and Gaetan Fonzi, in which he says he's coming down tomorrow, but in his book, he was there when he got shot. So he's clearly lying about something. Why he's lying, I don't know. Is he lying to make himself look like a super reporter? I'm not sure. He didn't really mention all his other super reporting with Antonio Veciana and your boy Frank Sturgis. So this is very interesting that he's telling at least one lie. And how many other lies are in the book? Who knows? So one of the most prominent proponents of the Warren Report is a gentleman by the name of Gerald Posner. Now, Gerald Posner wrote a book called Case Closed. And if you watch TV, Gerald Posner is always on TV saying that there was no conspiracy to kill JFK and that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. So Gerald Posner is a very interesting character. He got his start in journalism writing about a German Nazi doctor by the name of Joseph Mengele. And he started looking like he was actually doing some real investigation, but his book left out a lot of important things about Mengele, including the fact that he was helped by the CIC, which was one of the intelligence agencies before the Central Intelligence Agency, to escape to South America, where he was. And that while in South America, he was alleged in being one of these kind of most notorious drug lords. So he started off kind of almost like O'Reilly. It seemed like he was really investigating Mengele and the American government's relationship to Mengele. But by the time he writes his book, it was kind of, there was nothing about the American government's relationship to Mengele, nothing really about Mengele's relationship to drug trafficking. And we're going to do a deep dive into Posner and Mengele and other people like Klaus Barbie, who's also kind of drug dealer. But so this is the guy, though. This is the guy who the mainstream media points to as the debunker, as the guy who proves all the JFK assassination wrong. And also, he is also known as a serial plagiarist. So plagiarist is kind of a cardinal sin in journalism. It's a combination of lying, cheating, and stealing. You're stealing someone's work, you're lying about it because you're trying to cheat the game. So he's been accused of he's admitted to plagiarism, not just being accused of plagiarism. He had resigned from the Daily Beast, where he was the lead investigator, and because of all the plagiarism in the Daily Beast. And also his book, Miami Babylon, the Miami New Times found a lot of plagiarism in it. And then another professor found a lot of plagiarism in his books on 9/11 and Saudi Arabia. So Posner is a very interesting character. After he got fired from the Daily Beast, he took a very interesting job. Now, so while he's at the Daily Beast, right, he investigates a man by the name of Ahmad Wali Karzai. Now, Ahmad Wali Karzai was the brother of Ahmed Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, and also an alleged warlord. So initially, we have Gerald Posner going on Russia Today as a journalist investigating Ahmad Wali Karzai. So let's watch Gerald Posner, the journalist, talk about his investigation into Ahmad Wali Karzai.
First of all, just unfettered access for you with the Karzai brothers.
Right. I mean, I've been dealing with them now for about a month, and originally it was because I was doing a story into whether one of them, Ahmed Karzai, who's one of the great warlords in the southern part of the country, was in fact the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan. There are rumors for years now that he'd been heavily involved in heroin trafficking, and that's what I went after. I went after him, approached him on that, dealt with him. He denied it, of course. He said, there's no firm accusations, no firm evidence here of anything. Talked to the U.S. ambassador and others. But then I also talked to his brother Mahmoud, who's become, in a few years since his brother Hamid became president, one of the wealthiest people in a very poor country, around all the swirling allegations of corruption and backdoor dealing. So I've been dealing with these two very aggressive brothers for a while. And then today, the New York Times broke the story that Ahmed, the supposed drug dealer, was also a CIA asset for the past 8 years. So I was back on the phone with them again, both of them adamantly denying it, attacking the Times vehemently.
Absolutely. Now, I did read the article by the New York Times today, and it lays a pretty convincing case, at least in my opinion, about this tie between the CIA and Ahmed Wali Karzai. And you're saying that Mr. Karzai is vehemently opposing this. I'm kind of reading his reasoning to it, too, and it doesn't sound like it doesn't really hold as much water as maybe the article. I mean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. As a matter of fact, James Risen's a well-respected foreign journalist. The piece that he wrote in the New York Times is, although it has a lot of anonymous sources, it's redundant sourcing. It has specifics in there. It talks about the Kandahar Strike Force and Special Forces renting property from Ahmed Karzai, and he denies it in a broad brush. He says it's false. It's the work of my enemies. The New York Times has a vendetta. Risen has a vendetta against us, and this is a conspiracy. He says one thing that I do believe, which is this is politically timed. I mean, few things happen in international politics with intelligence agencies leaking information to a major newspaper right before the presidential runoff in a country that is as crucial to unity right now as Afghanistan, without political motivation being behind it. That I agree with. But I don't buy his denials. The one thing I do think that the CIA does, which they do very well, and I've dealt with intelligence, communities on my work on 9/11. I did it with my book on the Saudis, which was out 4 years ago. They give the people that they pay, like a Karzai brother, plausible deniability. And that means that when they rent the property from him to put their special forces on them, it doesn't come with a check that says from Langley, Virginia. It comes from a front company. When they deal with him on other things and pay him for information for tribal leaders and other things, they aren't paying him from the CIA. It's always from another front company or a contractor that's doing work for the military. So he can probably swear under oath that he's never been paid by the CIA and say it with a straight face. But everybody does it with a wink and a nod.
Right. What you're saying is you have to get through several levels to get to the actual absolute truth of this whole situation. This situation, maybe several other situations involving the CIA. But this also poses quite the entanglement when it comes to the U.S.'s relationship with Afghanistan, especially with what's going on between the two countries right now.
No question about it. You hit a key point. I mean, we're talking about two different things happening. One is President Obama is now confronting the decision of whether to commit additional American troops to Afghanistan. In the wake of all of this are questions about fraud in the last election in which the Karzai brothers' brother, Hamid, won the presidential election among counts of fraud, including the fact that Ahmed Karzai, accused as a CIA asset today, is one of those who was also accused of having been involved in some of the ballot fraud, having produced tens of thousands of ballots that were phantom ballots. So this creates a political problem for President Obama. In addition, we're talking about Afghanistan, the country that produces 93% of the world's opium, in which American soldiers are starting to show a small uptick on addiction numbers for heroin. And you have the fact that one of the president's brothers is being accused of being involved in the opium trade and working for the CIA. Boy, I think it's a political time bomb for the Karzais.
Absolutely.
All right, now it's very interesting listening to Gerald Posner talk about Ahmad Wali Karzai, who he seems to admit is the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan, and admits that this guy is also being involved in voter fraud and one of the richest men in Afghanistan. So after kind of taking that New York Times report at face value, he said he didn't disagree with it. After he gets fired from the Daily Beast because of multiple examples of plagiarism, he becomes the lawyer for Ahmad Wali Karzai, the person who he just called the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan. And here's how he writes in his letter. To the editor, I represent Ahmad Wali Karzai, the chief of Kandahar Provincial Council and President Hamid Karzai's younger brother. In your August 13th editorial, The State of War, you state, unprecedented American officials to assert the younger Mr. Karzai is involved in the opium trade and other corrupt enterprises, as well as being on the CIA's payroll. The editorial notes that Washington says has nothing that will stand in court. In conversations with the United States and Afghan officials, I have been told that President Karzai has challenged 2 United States ambassadors to bring any evidence about possible opium involvement by his brother Ahmad Wali personally to him, and they neither did so. So Gerald Posner went from being a journalist investigating the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan to a lawyer defending the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan. And this is the same guy who is the definitive word on the assassination of the JFK. Now he's working with alleged CIA agents who are involved in the opium trade as their lawyer. So what is Gerald Posner's motivation? Where is he coming from? Who are his sources? Is he legitimate? He's a plagiarist. Like who else is he plagiarizing from? Very interesting guy. I don't know. It's hard to take him at any face value. He's also been a lawyer for Victor Bout, who's the Merchant of Death, Lord of War in the Nicolas Cage movie, notorious arms dealer, and other Afghani warlords. So when he's not debunking the JFK assassination or debunking the MLK assassination, he's working as a lawyer for people who are allegedly CIA assets and heroin dealers. Very interesting guy. So we have Gerald Posner and Bill O'Reilly as the two kind of critics of the Warren Report and the anti-conspiracy theorists. So I think we got to really get rid of this term, because I think what we have here is propagandists calling real journalists and real historians conspiracy theorists. Now, if we go back to the document I showed, right? Now, the reason they do this is because they work for the same people who conspired to kill the president and continue to conspire to deal drugs and continue to conspire to overthrow governments. So now, in order to defend themselves, they want to make it seem like everyone who's criticizing them or everyone who's onto them is crazy. So they are conspiracy theorists. And that's where the term comes from.
Mankind. Huh? Yeah. Mankind. Mankind. Cactus Jack do love mankind. Cactus Jack do love. Cactus Jack. Mankind. Yo, check. Faster, slow. I heard caps exploding, so his cap explode. It got drastic, he had to go. Yeah. Reserve practice is fractional, he had to know. You don't talk about the Fed, boy. You don't talk about the Fed. I catch shots from the grassy knoll. Fast or slow, I heard caps exploding, so his cap explode. It got drastic, he had to go. Yeah, reserve practice is fractional. He had to know. You don't talk about the Fed, boy. A catch shots from inside your car or the grassy knoll.
Headshots in the headlines. Fed bank shot clock showing Fed time. That's 54 days for a year served. The Federal Reserve, that's a clear nerve. Word. Better watch what you say or get chased with a shot to the face. Bottoms up. Automatic super soakers, you ain't gotta pump. Machine guns with a lot of funk. Funkadelic, Commodore, brick, house, store credit. Atomic doggy style war fetish, I get it. Trying to get the best bang for your buck. Death Squad, gang, get it up. Raw dogs, Foxhound badge, never soft core. Solid snake on all fours. This is Abraham Lincoln, top hat on the 4th floor. Fitzgerald in the Continental 4-door. Martin on the balcony, Malcolm X through the Islam armed cavalry, reverse alchemy. Feds turn gold to shit. Take your hand out my pocket, you should know not to hold my. It's too big for your britches. Cachet's way too big for the glitches. So if a motherfucker has to go, there's one question that I have to know.
Fast or slow. I heard caps exploding, so his cap explode. It got drastic, he had to go. Yeah. Reserve practice is fractional, he had to know. You don't talk about the Fed, boy. You don't talk about the Fed. I catch shots from the grassy knoll. Fast or slow, I heard caps exploding, so his cap explode. It got drastic, he had to go. Yeah, reserve practice is fractional. He had to know. You don't talk about the Fed, boy. A cat shot inside your car. You gotta cash the blow. You can cop an assassin quick. It's that fast, you know. To have someone come crack your skull and let you have some more. Tater tots for the chicken, spraying shots, stay irrational. Young strapped in, bout that action, it's savage, yo. Imagine having a spaz and grab a ski mask for dough. Grab a ratchet, not even your last result. Imagine having to always tell the point guard to pass the ball. On the legs latching on, writing raps to the crack of dawn. Crack your dome. Fast or slow.